right. All right, good morning, everyone, and also good afternoon, depending on where you're tuning in from. And welcome to the September SDEC session. My name is Julia Petrie from Search Discovery, and if you're a returning SDEC member, we're glad to have you back. And if this is your first session, we're glad you're here. So as we give everybody a chance to join, we have launched a poll to gauge everyone's current knowledge on today's topic, the Adobe Experience Platform. So please submit your answer and we'll be checking those results shortly. So for those of you who are new, the Search Discovery education community offers webinars on various topics such as digital strategy, data science, and more. And very shortly, I'll be sending out a few links that include a link to our online video library, a link to join our email list so you can get all of the latest webinar updates, as well as a link to RSVP to our upcoming webinar on October 24th. So as we're listening to today's panel discussion, if you have any questions for our panelists, please place those in the Q&A and we will get to those at the end. So with that, I am excited to turn it over to our Adobe expert panelists, Ann Farmer, Sarah Owen from Search Discovery, and Steve Webb from Station 10.
Hey guys. Thanks everyone for joining. And we hope to cater to a wide variety of audiences here. So regardless of your answer to the poll, whether you're absolutely new to these technologies or you've personally implemented them and you are here to contribute to the discussion, we are happy to have you. I'm Ann Farmer. I'm the Director of Customer Success for Technology Solutions at Search Discovery. And I am joined, as we mentioned, by Sarah and Steve, and I will let them introduce themselves, starting with Sarah.
Hi guys, I'm Sarah Owen. I've been working with Adobe since it was called Omniture. It was green, and so now it's Adobe in red. It's been a big part of my life. And let's see, some fun facts I've been able to be part of the Adobe Champion program for the past couple of years. That's been fantastic. I think the new class is getting released here pretty shortly. And then I also get a co-lead an Adobe Analytics user group with two of my friends. So you'll have to check that out too. Another venue to learn more about Adobe. Steve, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks. Hey everyone, I'm Steve. I head up the analytics engineering team here at Station 10. My background also is primarily Adobe Analytics and implementing that for our clients for over the last 10 years. And here at Station 10, we're a small consultancy in the UK. And yeah, we help out our clients with implementing both Adobe and Google's analytics solutions and a number of other digital pieces.
Fantastic. And today's format is a panel discussion. So you will not hear us talking at you. You will not see slides. You will hear our thoughts on a bunch of perspectives related to our experiences implementing AAP and Web SDK. So if you haven't voted in the poll, we'd love to have some background on your experience level. Again, all levels welcome and fantastic. But we'll go ahead and jump in with our first question for the panelists, which is, if you had to define AEP, how would you define AEP?
Should I go first, Sarah?
You can go for it, Steve. Yeah, I'll follow you up.
It's not actually an easy question. So AEP is Adobe's new kind of suite of products that is beginning to replace their kind of Experience Cloud set of products. So where you previously had analytics and target and audience manager and ad cloud that were all pretty separate tools that I think historically Adobe have purchased and rebranded. They purchased Omniture in the past, etc. Experience Platform is an entirely kind of new platform where they're unifying some but not all of those products on a single platform. So now analytics and target can be part of AEP, but you've also got new products that come with it, like customer journey analytics and real-time CDP, which are only available on Adobe Experience Platform. So there's a lot of new three-letter acronyms to learn.
Yeah, that's true. There's definitely lots of acronyms, new acronyms. Yeah, totally agree. And I do think like one of the big things with AEP is, like, you know, coming from Omniture, it's all been just our analytics data. And with AEP, where all those tools that, you know, Steve, that you just rattled off kind of get a lot of their power from, is that the data is being centralized in AEP. So you get it into AEP, it's in a standardized format, you know, SDM, another one of your 3-letter acronyms. So it's formatted in a standardized way. And there's governance in there too. So I know that's a lot of people that I see moving over to the AEP, CJA, you know, are doing that for like HIPAA compliance, you know, really that privacy piece of it. Yep.
And
Yeah.
so with, oh, go ahead, Steve.
I was just going to say that data centralization piece is really key, because I think the main way to think about this is where previously, if you were, say, implementing analytics and target, you'd have to implement both of them and then make sure they connected on the other end and do that A for T integration or something like that. Whereas now there's kind of a single set of data collection. That data is then shared by the different tools on Adobe's side.
Having that centralized hub is a big thing, because a lot of these platforms historically have been very separate and varying degrees of difficult to integrate in a meaningful way. So it's nice to see all of that kind of finally coming together. So moving on with our definitions, how about Web SDK?
Yeah, so Web SDK is the new data collection library for AEP. So the way to think about this is it replaces essentially the visitor API, the Experience Cloud ID service, or visitor API.js. It replaces app measurement, so the analytics JavaScript library, and it replaces the AT.js, the target library. So it replaces those three and replaces them with a single new JavaScript library that handles that data collection. And it does that, kind of like I said, it does that data collection once, sends it off to Adobe, and then on Adobe's server side, you then handle forwarding it on to maybe analytics and target or whatever products you have.
Yeah. And I do know the title of our panel is the Web SDK, but I feel like I'm going to give a shout out to the other ways as well. So you do have the Web SDK that Steve brilliantly explained. I'm stealing one of your words, brilliantly. And then there's also the mobile SDK. So you can use that like in your iOS or your Android apps. And they also have a server API where you can send data to the Adobe Edge network from a server-side implementation. So like if you're using something like Tealium Event Stream. So we can focus on Web SDK, but we'll just tip our hats to the other two.
Yeah, there's a lot of interoperability that is possible now that hasn't necessarily been possible in the past, and lots of fantastic questions coming in. We will get to as many as possible at the end. I made sheet and intersperse some that fall in different categories just so we don't lose them, but lots of fantastic questions. Awesome. So moving on to the actual process of implementing these technologies. Not a lot of people have done this yet. Most people are still kind of early adopters that are doing this, which is fantastic. We're getting more and more experience. I think we're maybe just exiting the early adopter phase now. So that's why it's so beneficial to kind of talk about these experiences as a group. So starting with Sarah, what has your experience been like implementing Web SDK?
I mean, I think with Web SDK, it's actually taken me like down memory lane. I've like stopped to think about, so I've been in, doing analytics like Steve, multiple years, double-digit years. And so it made me think back about what has changed, what's changed from when it's been Omniture and it's green and gray as the interface, and you like literally put your code in an s_code.js file. Like, so I've come from that to DTM, which was, quite an amazing shift. And then I think we scared all the IT people. And I came from an IT background, so I could say like, oh, we scared everybody, saying that, oh, you guys can, bring down production. DTM, like, yeah, maybe. And then we moved on to launch now. And I think every single one of those was exciting, and something different, and you had new stuff to learn. But I really feel like this new way, whether it's, web SDK, mobile, or your server side, like sending your data to the edge network, and then how you're using XDM and the data streams to put it to the different products that, that Steve talked about before, that is, I think, really a drastic change. So what we've talked about before, I feel like, is really more of an implementation, like where are you doing your implementation, versus here, there's just so much change that on how you're surfacing the data, how is it looking, how you're getting it all the way over to Adobe and over to the tool. So I feel like the process of implementation, is more like, whoa, this is more of a seismic shift than I think I've seen in the past. Steve, what's your take on it?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say it's been there's a lot of different moving parts and a lot of different options. So there's lots of different there's some additional things to learn if you're coming at it from an analytics background. So things like schemas and data streams are kind of new features that get added kind of on top of your existing. You have to have launch and a data layer and that kind of thing. And it's kind of not immediately clear necessarily what the best practice way of doing things are. There's a lot of different options. And I think the process that I've gone through certainly is doing a lot of experimentation, doing a lot of kind of testing things out on dev environments or dummy websites and just seeing how things work and then working out what the best way forward is for the kind of the client or the situation that you're in.
Well, yeah.
That's often the boat that we find ourselves in with these major shifts is, okay, we're going to have to kind of figure out and reinvent best practices entirely because we're maybe the first set of people doing this. So it's definitely an interesting spot to be in. For sure. Yeah. Thank you guys for your answers on that. What would you say the most difficult part has been? And we kind of, I think, have alluded to this a little bit, but Steve, what about for you?
Yeah, definitely. Without kind of repeating myself, it is kind of knowing what the way to do things is, or what the most appropriate way of doing it is for your situation. So like depending on if you've got analytics or you might upgrade to CJA, or if you've got a legacy implementation and you're upgrading, or you're implementing analytics via AP Web SDK from scratch, if you've got a mobile app or not, these all can have a bearing on how you do the implementation and which of the kind of 3 or 4 different options you pick to do that. And that's definitely been the hardest part.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think kind of going back down my memory lane is, I don't know if it's hardest or maybe people are just moving my cheese and I'm not quite, I don't know. Some days I'm better with my cheese getting moved than others, but I think it's one of the hard parts is maybe it takes more steps, I feel, to get the data off the page and to Adobe and visualize in the workspace. I feel like right now, and maybe it is like you said, Anne, because it is new. So right now this feels like it's more steps, it takes longer. And whether you're going to CJA, so your whole kit and caboodle, you're going to CJA, or if you're using the Adobe connector to get data into CJA, I feel like it just takes a different maybe skill set than it has in the past, and a little bit more collaboration like before. Like Anne and Steve and probably a lot of people listening, like we've been able to go into the code, like go into launch, write the logic to pick up a piece of data, flip over to the Adobe Analytics UI, make our EVAR, and boom, there, we're passing the data, it's in the EVAR, it's visualized. So that's what I've been doing for 10 plus years. So to me, that's very quick and easy. And I think here with AEP and CJA and all the other tools that connect into AEP, that's where we really need to start saying, let's bring more people into that process earlier. So when I look at AEP, I think a lot of the initial use cases are bringing in web data, so I do feel kind of okay with that web data, but the whole point is then to bring in other data sets. And when we start having all these different types of data sets, you really need that data engineer as part of that mix, and you need them like much faster, because that way they're part of it. So when you bring the data in, like we've talked about, you have to have that XDM schema. how do we, with that XDM schema, you can have field groups, you know, so where do we want to put that piece of data? So we've really changed from like us writing a line of code in Launch and putting it over into an EVAR to, you know, getting the data, but then within AEP, determining how it best fits and how it can best fit with other pieces of data that are coming in and fit into the schema. So I think maybe it's not hard. It's just is different, and definitely it's all of you like ramping up on this new way to kind of do it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. And I think following on from that, and this maybe isn't a challenge now, but it's a challenge that I think organizations are going to have in the future, is that data governance becomes really important in AEP because, like I said, and like Sarah said, Adobe's giving you more options. Previously, you know, if you had maybe some data that was wrong in your data layer, you could choose to, well, I'll get the devs to fix it in the data layer, or I'll write a bit of custom code in Launch to fix it. But those are kind of your two options. You've got those options, plus you've got data prep in the data feeds to change things, and you've also got a lot of options in the data view creation in CJA. So there's a lot of potential to have loads of like little quick fixes at various levels in the tool that like that 3 years later nobody knows how anything works. So I think that's going to be another challenge kind of going forward for this, because it's a lot more flexible, but then there's a lot more places to change how the data behaves.
Yeah, we are actually just on a project yesterday. The project group I'm on, we were talking about that because we had that situation like, okay, with this piece of data, we can either do it at the very beginning, we can manipulate it, you know, before it's even sent. You can manipulate it, yeah, like you said, in the data prep, we can do a derived field. Like, where do we want to make that manipulation? And yeah, I think that is almost, all right, going back to something like we all kind of know is processing rules. Like when those first came out, like, yeah, you can fix stuff, but then processing rules are kind of hidden. So you can forget that they're there. And so I think to your point with having governance is like, okay, where do we do different types of manipulation? And that way it's documented and remembered, because that was kind of like the processing rules. Like people are like, well, don't try to use processing rules, you know, maybe as small as possible, because it's easy to forget they're there, and then it's manipulating your data. And so, yeah, I do feel like it's a whole new set of governance, for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting how this always comes back to people and documentation in different guises. This is a different version of it, but ultimately those things are still critical.
Yeah. True statement.
So moving on from the kind of difficulty of implementation onto the horizons afterwards a little bit. So what would you say are some key tips for people that are getting used to these new environments?
I would say I would go back to my collaboration. Collaboration, and like Steve, you even mentioned it at the very beginning, do it like in tandem, like keep your existing analytics in place and maybe do it on a dev site or something smaller. So that way you can get your feet wet, because there can be a lot. You have, like we talked about, Web SDK, or one of the ways to get the data to the Adobe Edge network. Then you have AEP, and there is a ton within AEP. And then you have stuff for CJA. And that's just our focus here. We won't go into other tools like, that are part of AEP. And so I feel like it can just be like, ooh, just like a tidal wave. And you kind of feel like, oh, forget, like, starting all over again from scratch. Everything's like very new. But I think this is a really fun way to have a team and learn it together, because that does have that big collaboration, like we talked about, like pulling in like the data engineers earlier. And so I think a tip I would give is to kind of just have, like, I don't know, like little parties, maybe like lunch and learns. And so like you have your implementation team. So the implementation team, there's new stuff for them to learn. So get together, learn more about the Web SDK and how it's sending data up. And I think like one thing that I've done with some of these implementations is to utilize some of the tools that are out there. So, search discovery, put out an extension called Adobe Analytics via AEP extension. So it's a mouthful. So we call it AVA internally. So what that extension does within Launch is it will help you start with what you know. So we all know props and evars and events, and we know how to use Launch. We know like rules and data elements and all that good jazz. And so it lets you can build on your already existing knowledge and use it to help you pump over the data into AEP. So it kind of is like a helper. So when you have that in place, you can do what you are used to doing, and then you can go look at the network tab and you can see it in XDM format. So I think it kind of just helps you get those next steps and see your actual data like in that new format. So I feel like you can read and read documentation. You're like, okay, I think I kind of get it. And then you go to do it and you're like, oof, I don't know, this doesn't look like that example from Adobe's tutorial. And so I think by using this this extension, it kind of helps you ease into it and you can see what's happening. And then, at least for me, I'm like, oh, when I see it with my data and my kind of setup, it makes a lot more sense. So I think definitely lean into that. Same thing with your data engineers. I think on just going easy into this and making sure each different group of people understand or at least have a chance to get together and talk about what they've read, talk about some experience they've had. Because with your data engineers, they're going to have to kind of get comfortable with the schemas, creating data sets, maybe even the data views. So that's a newer, like something that they do. So they're already writing probably like entity diagrams and all that good stuff, which is outside of my wheelhouse. But while it's kind of similar, it's a new tool. So giving them the opportunity to get comfortable with it. And then the analyst. So CJA, it's gorgeous in that it's very much like workspace. But they have a role to play too. So it's not like they get off the hook and they're like, oh, we're used to this, we're good to go. No one's moved our cheese. They have to definitely make sure that they're helping with the implementation and the data engineers. Like as the data comes through, Steve said, there are so many places that data can get manipulated. And so having the analyst at the end be able to like look at the data, maybe even do comparisons. And maybe it's okay if they're different, like maybe Adobe Analytics and how CJ is doing it is a little bit different. That might be okay, or it might not, but having the analyst there to provide feedback and really partner all the way through. I think that's my tip is go slow, bring everybody in, and make it a party. Definitely bring treats.
Yeah, I'd agree with all of that. I'd say, like we mentioned, like documentation is really important because there's a lot of new steps in the process. I've been having a lot of fun with Notion databases recently, and I've got tons of Notion databases all linked to each other, documenting data layers and data elements and schemas and stuff. So I definitely recommend doing something like that. And yeah, testing it out on a dummy site first. Absolutely. I think one other thing to do is to be pretty clear on your roadmap. Like, are you likely to upgrade to customer journey analytics or buy like bigger bits of the Adobe Experience platform in the future? Or are you're going to stick with analytics? That does kind of everything you need. That's cool. Because that has some, knowing that affects some of the decisions in terms of specifically which schema you use in AEP when you're implementing Web SDK. Without getting too technical, there's kind of like, if you're going to carry on putting the data into Adobe Analytics, you use the Adobe Experience Event schema, which is a schema that still has everything in evals and props. And then that actually makes life a lot easier. You don't have to worry about processing rules because it's automatically mapped to analytics. And that keeps kind of a level of familiarity where kind of once the data's in that schema, it's going to end up in analytics the same way as it used to. But if you're likely to buy CJA and real-time CDP and some of these products, then you don't want to be collecting your data in the legacy evals, props, and product strings from 15 years ago when it was on the chip. You want to be collecting it in the kind of new event-driven standard schema where your customer ID is in a field called customer ID, not in a field called eval 106. So you knowing that up front is really helpful, and it's not necessarily possible to know all that up front, but if you can, that's a really good thing to do, because that will really help you decide on some of the implementation questions.
Yeah.
And we have gotten through several of our different areas, I think, with that one question. So I'm gonna kind of continue with the post-implementation benefits and a couple of other things. And then we're going to make sure that we have plenty of time. We have a great number of audience questions, so I want to make sure that we save plenty of time for those. So in terms of the benefits, obviously this is a difficult process. It's something new to learn. From a technical perspective, as well as a general perspective, what are some of the benefits of undertaking this?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on your scenario. So if you're just sticking with analytics, there's not actually a kind of huge amount of immediate benefits. And I'd say if you're just on analytics, there isn't actually a massively compelling use case to upgrade to Web SDK immediately. What you're kind of mostly talking about is there's page speed benefits, because you're consolidating those 3 libraries that I mentioned, particularly if you're using both analytics and target. Then sorry, my cat's just walked into the room. So there's kind of that page speed benefit. Then you've also got that kind of just benefit of consolidating those libraries. Like if you were previously had analytics and target, and you had to ensure that they find in the right order so it doesn't break the integration, and you have to check the SDIDs and stuff, you don't really have to worry about that so much anymore. So that makes that process a bit more straightforward. And then the general benefit is that kind of future-proofing thing. If you're considering upgrading to CJA or real-time CDP, then having Web SDK implemented is kind of a prerequisite for those things, pretty much. So it's good to have that set up already.
Yeah. No, I think, kind of like we talked about before, feel like there might have been, when we went from the JS file that you had to have the dev team push out to DTM to launch, I feel like those changes were more like technical benefits, because then I could deploy from DTM or launch, versus waiting for someone else to deploy it for me. Or launch is now asynchronous. So I feel like some of the technical, those to me were super technical. I think with these changes, well, there's definitely the technical, the speed, page performance, one JS. I feel like we've done a lot of talking about a lot of stuff that's changed for that one liner, performance. I'm like, whoa, we're doing all this for performance? Seems like a lot. But then when I step back and think about it, maybe this one is more geared toward the merchandising and marketing and the analysts, more of a benefit there, because now with all the data together, you can maybe more easily, that's the selling point. Like you said, if you're going CJA, you have not only your web data, but you always hear Adobe say, bring in your point of sale data, bring in your contact or customer care center data, and be able to visualize that, in Workspace, which they're great visualization. So that I think is one of the benefits. And then, merchandising on that first page, having the edge network, that's another thing you'll hear as a positive, is hey, you can get that personalization on that first page and not have to wait for later into the visit. Or even going back to privacy and personalization, making sure that the marketing, that the data within AEP, it does have all that governance in it. So just helps have another layer to ensure that data is being used in the fashion that people opted into or opted out of. So I don't know, I feel like in the past we've seen a lot of technical, I'm not saying there's not technical here, but I feel like there's a lot of non-technical benefits maybe with AEP and CJA. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a nice thing to bring all of those teams together. And historically, unless you were on Data Workbench, which was its own monster, which is in my past as well. Not necessarily, you wouldn't have had interaction between analytics and the team that manages the call center data, or the team that manages the point of sale data, or the customer database, or anything like that. And undertaking these types of projects forces groups to interact that otherwise would not. And you have to kind of think through that in terms of, how often is this data refreshed? Does everybody have the same information? How are we using this together? What are the caveats? And those are conversations that are really beneficial to have, and implementing something like this kind of forces that collaboration, hopefully ultimately in a positive way in the end.
There's another benefit. You're forced to talk to each other.
So
Awesome.
I know we have a lot of questions, so I think I'm going to end with a little bit of the privacy discussion. So this is specifically for Sarah. So there's been a lot of interest from U.S. healthcare providers. So if you'd like to speak a little bit to that angle and in terms of the privacy handling there, and then we will have plenty of time for audience questions after that.
Oh, it sounds fantastic. Yeah, with that. So with the AEP, I think it was about 2 years ago or so, Adobe announced that their experience cloud for healthcare. And that was an offering that had HIPAA ready products. And so the HIPAA ready products were tools that, Steve has been talking about throughout the seminar here, like Experience Manager is one of them, CJA, Journey Optimizer, the real-time CDP. And I know there's a page that Adobe lists out all of them, so I know there's more, but those are some of the big hitters that kind of relate to a lot that we've been talking about here today. And so with those products being able to be HIPAA ready, that means like if you're a healthcare system or company, you can utilize these tools. But to really make the HIPAA ready piece of it, you do have to have an additional SKU called Healthcare Shield. And so you'll have CJA, all these things, plus your Healthcare Shield, which provides the add-on that you need to have that HIPAA ready state. And so then you can collect some of that personal information, or that healthcare information and use it within those confines. So within CJA, within your Journey Optimizer, so that way you are making sure that you can utilize the data in the appropriate fashion, and not get in trouble. And I think we have a couple links, and that maybe you could drop into the chat to share with people, because that'll help kind of explain it a little bit more too for everybody. But yeah.
Yes. I will drop the links from Sarah into the chat here. So and I'm not sure that actually that this chat has gone to everyone. So in the background, Julia, if you can see this chat in the host room, if you can provide it globally as well, if I did not, that would be much appreciated. Thank you. So we have a whole bunch of awesome questions. So some of these are going to be super detailed, so I'm going to try to consolidate them. We're going to try to either give quick answers or say that could be a webinar in itself. So we have an anonymous question. Somebody is using Selenium with Python bindings, and they're asking if it's possible to create automated tests that grab analytics events and EVARs as they're sent. And right now they're using the debugger, which is more manual than what they would like.
Yeah, that's definitely still possible. I've used Selenium a little bit myself, but not a huge amount. Depending on how frequently you're doing it, there's kind of paid tools as well, like Observe Point, that do a similar thing there. But yeah, as far as I'm aware, if you're doing that currently with analytics, then that's also possible with AEP for sure.
And question on how mature is the Target and CJA integration? As far as I know, there's nothing like A for T there yet.
Yeah. Hey, Lucas. I actually don't know the answer to that question, so I myself haven't done a Target plus CJA integration yet. But yeah, as far as I'm aware, at least from the Adobe like roadmap documentation, analytics for Target style integration with CJA is still on the planned list rather than the delivered list.
And question on governance. So I'll take this one via a quick answer. So it is the governance that we're talking about a substitution for products like Observe Point? No. So the governance that we were talking about is more in terms of what can you do with how the data is used once it gets in and how are you managing it? Whereas those types of tools are for proactively catching issues. So any tools, whether you're writing your own in Selenium, you're using Observe Point, you're doing something else, that proactive catching is still an important and necessary component of this. You don't want to put Band-Aids on everything just because you can. You want to know and fix it at the source. I mean, you're able to do that, but you know, didn't think about whether you should. You just don't want to wind up there. Okay. Let's see. Okay, we answered that one. Then question, if you have direct call variables, what would be the equivalent in WebSDK?
So I think, so by direct calls, I assume you mean like satellite.track events. So those,
I anticipate that is what they mean.
Yeah. So launch is still the same with AEP. All the regular launch functionality that you're used to is still a thing. So you can absolutely carry on using direct call variables with WebSDK. You just in launch your triggers and conditions are still the same, and then you just have a different action in the action bit where you're using the WebSDK extension as opposed to the analytics extension. So you can carry on using those. And I think I'd have to check the documentation on the activity map equivalent in CJA. I believe also that was either something that they've recently added or is on the like soon to be added list, but I'd have to check the documentation on it.
Yeah, I know that's been discussed. I'm not sure if it's out yet either. But awesome. Then question on client-side JSON event-driven data layer with WebSDK. So the extension that Sarah was talking about earlier, it basically does just that. If you already have an event-driven data layer in place, that can be translated to XDM format. Sarah, if you wanted to add anything on your side as well.
No, that sounds fantastic. Yeah, because with that, like we talked about earlier, when you're using the Adobe Analytics via AEP web extension, it does actually have some of those niceties. So kind of going back to that previous question, is it will still look like your track link calls and track page calls. So once again, using that kind of helps you ease into it because you kind of can still use what you're used to while transitioning to the new lingo and the new like formatting. And it does format it into the schema that would automatically, like if you're going from WebSDK to Adobe Analytics, it will, format it to where it can directly go and do that automatic mapping that Adobe talks about into Adobe Analytics. So that is nice because then once again, you can take advantage of that, see how it happens, check it out. And the implementation I did when I used that, the Ava, that extension is I also used Apollo. So that's another search discovery tool. It's like an analytics, like content management system kind of. And so with Apollo, you can do both. I'm going to call it traditional because I'm not ready to call legacy yet. Versus like a new implementation. So you can do your traditional web or Adobe Analytics implementation with Apollo plus the new Web SDK implementations. And when you use it with the Web SDK implementation, Apollo will actually make like the schemas and the data streams on your behalf. So once again, it's using a tool that is something that's, kind of slick to use, easy to understand, and it builds this out for you. And then you can go check it out and say, oh yes, now what I read in Adobe's documentation is making sense because I see it kind of more in my setting. So I actually use those two together to make it slick. Yeah, thanks.
And the nice thing is any type of modern data layer that you currently have in place, you don't have to scrap it to do this.
No.
There's not, which is good because that is always a huge barrier to adoption of anything.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Yeah, when you're reading through, I'll chime in a little bit more, but like Steve said, there's so many options, like just with the data, like you can definitely send it. You can make your data layer in XDM format. So you can redo it and go crazy and make it match. Or, when you send the data, you can use these extensions to have it mapped to XDM for you. Or there's actually mapping, like when you're doing that server side, when you send your data up, you can do mapping there too. So once again, there's lots of places where you can do the different mapping, lots of places to make decisions. So, yep. We need to get together, lunch and learns.
Yes. Then there are some questions that are very detailed, which unfortunately we're not going to have time to answer all of them, but these are all very good questions. Comment that you basically have to be a full stack engineer these days. Yes, or have a really good team around you.
Yeah.
This can be true. Already talked about A4T a little bit. Roles that should be added or considered when implementing these technologies, we'll jump to that. So Sarah, I know you kind of mentioned the roles that different people would play, but anything else you'd like to add on that front?
I think it's just really taking them all to the front. So everybody is part of like the kickoff on day one. Like implementations that I've seen on this that go well do have, just like we've talked about, have that documentation so they out front. So, okay, what's the plan of attack? What are the variables? How do we want to treat them? Is it a string? Is it an array? Because there you get all of them can be arrays. Like you're not limited to 3 list vars anymore. You can have lots of like list vars. So I do think it's bringing everybody up together and just really going forward as a team, like you said, versus, I don't really mean this in a bad way. Like when I say this out loud, we're like, oh, those poor data scientists, our data engineers, we're just like, oh, you can deal with our data later, with the data feed out of Adobe Analytics. That's yours. You go play with that, but now it's really bringing everything forward. So you're in step and in sync and knowledgeable about each piece. Like, well, like if you're in implementation, implementing it on the front end, you may not work with and make the schemas, but you do need to know enough about it and work with those data engineers. So being knowledgeable about each step might not go deep in it, but knowledgeable is definitely needed. Steve, what do you think? I see you're shaking your head.
I think kind of one important thing is, especially if you're putting more than just web analytics data into AEP, or even if it's just web analytics data, it's like you said, getting the people who understand the back end data involved in the schema creation, because in AEP, you're defining data sets and you're defining fields and you're calling them things and you're adding kind of data about what those fields should be. And it's really important that that actually aligns with the back end data systems. So you're not creating like a second, slightly different view of the world in AEP. So yeah, I think it's much more important in AEP to have that connection between the people who are traditionally just doing the web analytics and the people who understand the back end data in the business.
Yes, and to kind of summarize and add on a bit to that, we have the back-end data engineering, which needs to absolutely be more integrated up front, as well as the analysis side. So people that are ultimately going to be analyzing the combined data need to understand what it's made up of and the caveats, and align as a business in ways that maybe they haven't before. So I don't know necessarily that the roles have changed, but the roles have more arrows out to the rest of the business potentially than in the past, which is ultimately a good thing, because that should ideally be the goal of your analytics implementation, is to benefit the business rather than just cost money and engineering time in the end, which it can be easy to forget as much as the engineering part is fun. But question on how big a change this is, have our customers come into this discussion understanding how big a change this is, the S objects going away, et cetera. I would say yes. We definitely, in my experience on our side, have not said, oh, it'll be easy. Like, that is not a phrase that we would utter in regards to this, but it will be potentially worth it in the end to get some of this additional functionality. And Steve, what would you say from your side in terms of that
Yeah.
initial, like, how big of a change is this going to be?
I think it honestly depends on how complicated your existing implementation is. Like, if you've got just quite a clean data layer and you're just taking this data layer object and you're putting it in evar 6, and that's pretty much all that's going on in launch, then actually it's really not that much. You've just got a little bit of extra stuff with some data streams and a schema. And I'm kind of guessing because the person's mentioning S objects and stuff, if you've got a lot of custom code in launch and you're doing a lot of things in JavaScript, then yeah, it's a much bigger deal because all of that JavaScript changes. So it kind of depends how sort of neat and tidy your current implementation is, I would say.
And the process of debugging as well, that does change, and that's a learning curve as well, for sure. So definitely something that should be included in, onboarding, offboarding to these types of platforms.
Well, one major shout out while we're talking about debugging is if you're on the mobile app SDK, the new assurance feature is amazing. If anyone's ever tried to do mobile app debugging using Charles, like 10 times better. And yeah,
I feel like it's a rite of passage though. Can you get your analytics call from your phone through Charles onto your, well,
I mean,
something else to be the rite of passage.
I mean, after 13 years doing this, I still struggle doing that. So.
That's awesome. But also, like, another thing earlier, other than the rite of passage, made me think, like, if there's stuff, if you haven't done maybe a cleanup, maybe do a cleanup. Like, don't lift and shift. Like, don't move over more stuff than you need to. Like, no matter what, no matter how straightforward it may be. I think this is a really good opportunity to also come back and circle back to say, hey, are all these data points still what we need? Has something changed? Do we not need it? Do we need something different? So
yeah,
that's pile on. Great opportunity to look at it too. So
yeah, that's definitely a thing we've done with a couple of our clients. Have used this as an opportunity to revisit the launch implementation and the data layer, just to see if actually it's worth cleaning those up before building more on top of things that already have a bit.
Oh, awesome.
Changing gears a little bit. So we've been very much in the weeds, and there are a couple of questions on here on, hey, I'm a beginner to some of these topics. Where should I start?
And Adobe has, and we might have to like put this in the follow-up email or something, but they have a tutorial. Like, it's their new one is Luma. I think I remember what was JJ Esquire, so they're dated myself. It's now Luma. So, but they have a really good tutorial that will walk you through it. So you can see the different screens, you can kind of walk through, and you can do it yourself. And they also have, my favorite is a cheat sheet where it will like, hey, this is what it should look like at the end. And so if you didn't want to go step by step, you could kind of cheat and just go straight to their like finished product. So I think that they have I feel like that Adobe's been trying really hard to put some good documentation out there to help us, get it.
And I know we are close to time. Julia has reappeared. So I'm going to try to just speak to a couple of other things that are in the chat very briefly, and then we will wrap up. So there is definitely a learning curve. There's definitely more knowledge that has to be gained, more integration, more teams. And so there's kind of some hurdles that you have to clear. There's a lot that we could say on building out the schemas that unfortunately I don't think we have time for now. There's some comments about first-party device IDs. So there's some options to bring your own IDs, or combine the IDs, and there's more that's coming in terms of the ID service and being able to patch IDs together in ways that are more similar to what you were previously able to do with Data Workbench. So that's kind of a whole other webinar almost that we could do just on identity services. as far as, how many people have made the switch, I don't know that I could do a percentage offhand, but I would say, like I said, that we're just out of early adopters into, okay, it's kind of picking up steam. And I will pause there so that we respect your time with this webinar. But we're very, very happy to have had Steve and Sarah join us, go over some of our experiences with these implementations. We could definitely talk about this for another hour if we had it available to us. We have a lot to say on it. And we really appreciate that everyone was able to attend. So I will turn it over to Julia for some closing comments.
Yes, well, thank you so much to all of you for being such wonderful panelists and leading such a great discussion. I want to thank everybody who tuned in and for all the great questions. I think there's such a large conversation, and we can totally have maybe a follow-up to help address some of those other questions that we didn't get to. So stay tuned for a follow-up email. It'll include the recording as well as additional information related to today's session. So in the meantime, I hope everybody has a great week, and we hope to see you at the next SDEC session in October.
Awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.